Okay, welcome back, everybody. Today, apologize for not being able to be here live, but again, I had a meeting this morning with the administration to discuss what e-learning for my high school would look like moving forward. So yesterday, got into the Freudian stages of psychosocial development or psychosexual development in the case of Freud, and we had talked about stage one, the oral stage, and we'd even gotten into the kind of bizarre stage two, the anal stage. And today, we're going to pick it up with stage three, the phallic stage. And these names just keep getting better and better, don't they? I mean, I assume everybody knows what a phallus is and what's being referred to in the phallic stage. This is from when kids are about 3 years old to 6 years old. And this is the stage where kids really start to become aware of their bodies. They start to learn. Again, these names make a certain amount of sense. The difference between being a boy and being a girl, that's what, a phallus, a phallic is representative of a male penis. And so certainly learning that the different sexes have different body parts kind of goes along with this stage. And all that is kind of rests on the existence of a phallus or not. You're a girl if you don't have a phallus, you're a boy if you have a phallus. So at least that's what Freud thought. That's sort of a controversial aspect of his theory, particularly in today's world where the existence of biological sex as opposed to a psychological identified sex is somewhat controversial and being discussed regularly. But basically what he was saying is that the absence of a penis or not absence of a penis was the defining thing in this stage. He's gotten a lot of flack for that, and we won't go into that right now in total, but basically what's going on here is kids are learning that boys are different from girls. And this is also where the famous Oedipus complex comes into play. What's happening is these kids are realizing their gender. Again, none of this is truly proven. These are Freud's ideas, is that as boys realize that they're boys, they become really jealous of their father because he can have sex with their mother. They kind of simultaneously want to have sex with their mothers and kill their fathers, which they can't do because they're kids, and that's frustrating. So basically, their mothers are the defining female role in their life. They know that they instinctively, in some way, that eros, again, the libido, that they want to have sex with a female. Since the mother's the defining female in their life, that's kind of a misplaced sexual desire with their mother. And I know it sounds really bizarre. And again, this is all Freud, so this is where it gets kind of weird with him again. For girls, there's theoretically another complex that's called the Electra complex. And that goes the other way, so that they want to have sex with their fathers and get rid of their mothers. And this is something that Freud thought was natural. This is not a disorder. This is something he thought happens to everybody. And don't think of it in terms of a erotic desire as much as a desire to have. If you look at the relationship in my personal life between my boys when they were this age and their mother, they were always very cautious about me spending time with their mother. They'd interrupt everything. If there was any chance of there being some intimacy in that relationship. And I don't have daughters, so I can't speak towards the Electra complex. But, and I'm not saying I agree with Freud, but you can kind of see where he's coming up with these ideas that little boys are, they love their mothers, and, they're very jealous that their mother shows love to anybody else other than them. And you can even see it amongst, the rivalry between brothers for their mother's attention and things like that. So this experience of these feelings and desires, he thought, helped out developing the super ego. And what he thought was that since the parents are associated so strongly with morality and long-lasting thinking, Freud thought that working through the Oedipus complex can actually help you develop a strong, healthy sense of the super ego. And the good outcome of this is that they learn to deal with these feelings and not act on them. They have them, but they're not acting on them. And this is the conclusion of the phallic stage. They want to get rid of their father. They don't like him. They want to beat him, but they can't because they're so small. And so they have to learn a sense of morality in that way about, what they have to accept in their lives to get along with others. Stage 4, thankfully, has a much calmer name, and that is latency. And this is when you're 6 until you hit puberty. And latency means exactly what it sounds like. There's basically nothing going on in this period at all. And there's no explicit sexuality, at least that's what Freud thought. Kids start doing other things. They make friends. They like to go to school. They're not really obsessed with their bodies as much or any of those things we were talking about earlier. The important thing that happens during latency is that this is when, so if anything went wrong during the earlier stages, if they weren't toilet trained properly or they didn't work out their Oedipus complex properly, this is where these things start to get solidified into character traits and personality. So all the things that can go wrong in childhood get turned into a real personality during latency. And then we get into stage 5, the genital stage. And next is basically what happens after puberty and for the rest of your life, the genital stage. And not to be confused with the phallic stage, this is the genital stage, number 5. What really happens in this stage is kids become independent of their parents. And that's the goal. They get there. Now they're independent for the rest of their lives. And like the phallic stage, the focus here, once again, is on the genitals, or what makes you a boy or a girl. Those genders are going to lead you into feelings of certain occupations or careers that you're suited for, your role in the family structure, things like that. But in this stage, the sexuality is adult and aimed at another person. It's not just like, I'm this and you're that. It's what we're mostly familiar with, and with the term libido, which is that it's the sex drive to actually have sex with somebody else. And that's what really gets going during the genital stage. In this part, the ego and the superego are as developed as they're going to get. And hopefully it went well. You don't have imbalances there. And we're not just satisfying primal urges anymore. They're reined in. Any issues that happened in the first 3 stages, however, then crystallize into personality during latency. And now you're in the genital stage, and this is how you're going to be the rest of your life. And if you have problems in this, then you need to revert back to those stages, which is a lot of what Freud wanted you to do in psychoanalytic theory, reaching into your subconscious to, rationalize and talk about the problems in the earlier stages that you weren't aware of, and trying to work through them too, and then advance back into the genital stage. And this is your personality. Freud, very weird theories. One of the biggest problems with Freud's theories is they're not falsifiable. In other words, science has to be falsifiable. There has to be a way to prove it to be true or false. And Freud's theories, there is no real way to prove whether they're true or false. And that's probably the biggest weakness of Freudian psychosexual development. So certainly these are Freud's theories, but for the most part, while they're used to recognize that there are probably stages in this, they're not accepted in the psychological community as much anymore. But he was one of the first people to do it. And so his theories of development have certainly shaped how we think about development, and they've certainly seeped into the pop culture. But Freud is not the end all be all, and I wouldn't accept everything he said here as kind of that's how it is. Which brings us then into the humanistic views of personality. And one type of psychology that offers a theory of personality, and we've already talked about it from Unit 1, is humanistic psychology. And humanistic psychology attempts to help individual people achieve their full potential. It maintains that people are fundamentally good. And humanistic psychology is historically significant for its focus on good qualities and flourishing people instead of suboptimal qualities and psychologically unsound ones. Alongside Abraham Maslow that we talked about with his pyramid of needs, or his hierarchy of needs, one of the forerunners of humanist psychology was Carl Rogers. And he's especially well known for non-directive or client-centered therapy. And the therapist in this type of counseling tries to create a non-judgmental environment by being open and honest, accepting, and empathetic. And the term empathy refers to the ability to recognize and feel the emotions of others, to put yourself in another's shoes. That's really what being empathetic is. Sympathetic just means that you can, I feel for you. Empathy is, I actually feel what you're feeling. So the goal of a client-centered approach is to help clients themselves to find their own answers to their questions. And in fact, it's called non-directive or client-centered therapy precisely because the client, rather than the therapist, is supposed to come up with the solutions. But Rogers is also known for his theory of personality, which focuses on a self-concept or a person's perceptions and beliefs about himself. Rogers believed that three different components constitute the self-concept: self-worth, self-learning, and the ideal self. And in a way, these three correspond somewhat to Freud's id, ego, and superego, and we'll get into that here. So let's define each of these three components to do that. First, self-worth or self-esteem is the set of beliefs we hold about ourselves. For Rogers, self-worth was heavily influenced by early childhood. And he believed that for positive self-worth to develop, it was important for children to receive unconditional positive regard. And what we mean by that is children can't be told they're bad, basically. They have to be told maybe they made a mistake and there was a better way of doing something, but being a child being told they're stupid or they're bad outright would not develop this unconditional positive regard. So it's acceptance no matter what a person says or does, and support in spite of mistakes and shortcomings. And as a therapist, Rogers tried to provide unconditional positive regard for his clients. Self-image, meanwhile, is how we see ourselves, such as whether we see ourselves as being attractive or unattractive. And finally, the ideal self is the person we would like to be. But the ideal self can change over time. For example, the goals and ambitions that you have today may differ from the goals and ambitions you held when you were 5. Although everyone's potential is unique, Rogers used the phrase fully functioning person to describe all self-actualized individuals. And he believed that our self-concepts usually do not perfectly correspond to reality. For example, maybe a student earns good grades and is highly intelligent based on objective real-world criteria, but the student himself believes he is stupid. Or they may be, very fit, very attractive in real-world objective standards. However, they think they're fat. So Rogers called this an incongruence. And he thought incongruence was partially caused by a lack of unconditional love, and that incongruence caused anxiety. And the idea of incongruence also means that the subjective self-concept can shape personality at least as much, if not more, than reality. And this was an important insight. So for a humanist, to sit down and talk to someone who has a problem, you're not judging them and saying, wow, you're pretty sick in the head. Freud would do that. Freud would say, well, if you go back into the oral stage, why you've got an oral fixation because you were weaned off the breast way too early. But for Rogers, it would be, well, no, it's not what you're doing is bad. It's only bad if you don't want to do it. And if that's the case, you're not a bad person. We just need to find ways to help you not do it. So that's kind of the humanistic therapeutic approach based on those things. Excuse me. Lastly, today we're going to talk about personality assessments. How do psychologists get in and dig into your personality to kind of figure out what kind of person you are? And this is what we're going to talk about, trait assessment testing. And what this basically is just models of testing personality, figuring out personality traits. And you probably do this all the time in your life whenever you're describing somebody like a friend. You might say some physical traits, but mostly what you're going to do is talk about personality traits. And even really generic descriptions like she's nice, she's fine, those are personality assessments in very small ways. And so this might seem like something that's pretty natural, and it is. And it's also subjective, like your awful ex is probably now someone else's loving girlfriend or boyfriend, and that's fine. But what we tend to assume about other people's personalities and their personality traits is that their actions are directly indicative of their personality. And this is something that's called the fundamental attribution error. What it basically says is that we're more likely to describe our own behavior as being related to something about the situation. So if you trip over a rock, You're not going to say that you're inherently clumsy. You're just going to say that the rock was in your way. But we don't give other people the same license when we observe them trip over the rock. If we saw someone else trip on a rock, that's all the information you have about them. And so you're just going to say that they are clumsy. You want a more scientific, better way of talking and thinking about personality as a psychologist. So what a group of psychologists did was they took a look at a bunch of personality tests that had been administered over the years. And what they realized is that there were actually 5 traits that seemed to kind of pop out of all these tests and seemed to be the most valid. So the answers would tend to be consistent basically in those 5 areas. And the 5 traits that they found can be conveniently arranged into an acronym of OCEAN, O-C-E-A-N. And what these are: O, openness; C, conscientiousness; E, extroversion; A, agreeableness; and N, neuroticism. And we're going to go through all these things, but remember they make O-C-E-A-N, OCEAN. So as I talk about them, you can file them away in that little acronym as a good way to remember them. And I think a good way to go through this, to just look at a person in a situation, how each of these traits would make them act. So we're going to talk about our friend Tori, and she decides to go to a party at her friend Stacy's house. And she's kind of apprehensive about it a little bit because she doesn't really know everybody there. She knows Stacy. She used to live with Stacy. And now Stacy is living in a new place and has new friends. She's a little apprehensive, but she's really curious about meeting new people. On the openness scale, she's moderately open because she's curious about it. But she's not like, oh yeah, for sure, this will be great. And in general, open people are really curious about the world and they seek adventure. They want new experiences. They want new ideas. And Tori is kind of midway on this. The next trait in OCEAN, the C, is conscientiousness. When Tori goes to the party, she's doing okay. She's meeting people. Things are fine. She looks at her phone and she sees that she has a missed call from her mom, which you never really want to see that when you're out. But she goes outside, calls her mother back, and what her mom tells her that she was supposed to stay home and look after their new dog, and she didn't. There's not enough time to get back there already, so she stays at the party, and her mom's okay with this. But this demonstrates that Tori has low conscientiousness, because what conscientious people do is they plan ahead, and they have self-discipline, and they wouldn't forget about promising that they would do a chore. So let's say she's dealt with the situation. She doesn't feel that great about it, but she goes back into the party and she really is great at talking to people. She's just charming the pants off everyone at the party. They really like her. And even though she doesn't know them that well, she can get past this and just do it. And what this demonstrates is that she has really high extroversion. And you've probably heard of someone who's an introvert, that they spend a lot more time alone with themselves. Extroverts are people who spend time with other people. Because what extroverted people do is they have tons of energy and they get energy from being around people. They really like it. If someone were not extroverted, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're shy. Like an introvert isn't a shy person, but they're someone for whom being around people is actually extra effort. They don't get energy from it. It's draining, but they can still do it. But Tori, she loves it. She gets energy from it. It's great. She's having a great time. She's highly extroverted. So things are going well. She's glad that she came. She's going to the bathroom and she runs into a girl who's on a staircase and she's crying. She's kind of hanging out there, huddled, looking really sad. Tori's a little unsure about how she wants to deal with this, so she hesitates. She ends up going and confronting her, or comforting her, I'm sorry, but she's not sure she's the best person to deal with this situation because she doesn't know the girl, really. So it turns out that the girl is dating a guy and he hasn't shown up. She's dressed up as Hobbes and he's supposed to be Calvin. It just doesn't make any sense now. It's just really upsetting. So Tori kind of deals with this. She tries to get her to come back to hang out with people and not be sad. And this shows that Tori is moderately high on agreeableness. Agreeable people are compassionate and they really like working with others to solve problems. And Tori did it. She went and she helped this girl, but it wasn't her first instinct to go and do it. She thought about going and using the other bathroom and not having to pass her on the stairs, but she did in the end, so she's moderately agreeable. So she's dealt with this. It's been a good night mostly so far. She realizes that she actually can't find Stacy, who is the host, who is sort of her really true friend at this party, the only person she truly knows. And she starts to get worried about it. She's mostly confident around other people, but she kind of wishes she knew where Stacy was. And this shows that she's moderately high on neuroticism. People who are high on this trait, they tend to be really prone to bad emotions, and like anxiety, depression, anger. And she gets a little nervous when she can't find Stacy. She gets kind of anxious about it, so to say. She's moderately high on neuroticism. She doesn't freak out, but she does get nervous, and it makes it a little difficult to keep interacting with people. And then Stacy turns up, it's fine, everything's great, the rest of the party goes well. But as you can see, this kind of situation where people have to do things that are maybe a little out of their comfort zone, a little bit different, it's a good way to see what personality traits they really embody. Parties kind of bring out the best and worst in people. And as you can see, that's what happened with Tori. And through Tori, we can see those 5, the ocean there, openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism kind of come out, and we can observe and kind of learn what a total personality picture looks like for someone in these situations. So that's our lecture for today. Once again, I apologize for not being able to be here live. If you do have questions, feel free to use the chat function still. I'll be able to read those and I'll respond to those for you, or you can certainly go on the Facebook page and leave a comment or text me if you prefer, and we can certainly engage in an online discussion regarding these things. Otherwise, I will be back live tomorrow to end up the week, and then don't forget next week is kind of our electronic spring break, so I won't be live with you next week for these things, but we will. This presentation wrapped up what would have been Unit 4, and certainly in a couple weeks we will start Unit 5. So I hope everything's going good with you guys. Enjoy the day. It looks like it will be a pleasant one, and I will talk to you tomorrow.